It's July 19th, 2004,
Yep.
and my Uncle Hubert Wright has agreed to do an interview so we can hear all the interesting tales
Yeah.
of when he was young, living in Shepody, and about his first job, and
There's a nice gentle rain, so this is a good way of doing
a
it.
good way,
Yeah.
yes, exactly, because
Yeah.
you
No,
can't be out
no,
touring
no,
cemeteries or
no
anything
desire
today.
to go out. No,
Exactly.
no.
So this is something I've been waiting to do, and so we'll get started. So I'm going to go down to the end of the table.
Okay, there. There's no telling where this will end, but it will end eventually. Well, maybe it'll run out of tape.
Well, we have a good hour at least.
Yeah. Well,
So
you wanted to know, I guess, my early thoughts. My memories as a really little guy are very short and vague. There's two or three. Now, I remember going with my mother to the governor's house when Aunt Annie was still alive, and I don't remember the house other than going up the stairs. There was a bend, and there was I guess a table and chair there, and kind of a window, and I remember her sitting there. Now that's all I remember of her. Another recollection I have, and I am in the back of a car with Mama, and I think it's probably Fred Smith's car. Fred Smith's wife was anyway. They came from up in there somewhere, and we were visiting. Mom had gone with them to visit, and it was cold, and it was open windows. Of course there were, and we were in the back, and the wind was blowing, and I remember being terribly cold as I cuddled up to her. Now, I imagine I'm thinking something, when I was maybe 5 or 6 or something like that, but I don't have great recollections of when I was a little gaffer.
what were some of the chores that you had to do on the farm when you were a young fellow?
Well, one of them that was quite memorable was putting in the wood. Of course, there was the wood house was in the fall was filled in the wood house there. Plus, that was the kitchen wood. Then there was the wood for the stove in the parlor, in the dining room came from outside. It was bigger and heavier, and that was one of my early chores, and I considered it to be quite a chore. Now, you probably remember that the wood went in one side from the wood house and was picked out at the other side.
I remember that, yeah.
And I was young enough and stupid enough that I thought I found a solution to that. So one time I wedged it in so tight they couldn't get it out, couldn't pull it out. I just kept driving it in until when they came to get the wood out, they couldn't get the wood out. And I thought that was going to take care of it for me for the rest.
You'd lose your job.
But that was one of my chores. The others, I don't really remember. I guess I had little chores.
You had to get the apples already for the Hopewell Hill
Oh
Fair.
yes, oh yeah. I picked apples and so on and got them for the fair. Had to climb up the ladder to the top of the tree to get the big shiny ones. And hardly any of that kind of apple still exists.
Yes,
You sent me the
yes, the list of the
yeah,
varieties.
yeah.
Tell us about your special box, your special apple box.
Well, it wasn't mine. This was for taking to the exhibition, and there was one of the things that you put up at the X was your how many all of your apples. An individual apple were on tables of 5, or not tables, but trays of 5.
Mm-hmm.
The other was a great big box, and I guess, I don't know, my grandfather or my father made it, and it was, I think you've seen it, haven't you? Yeah, it's a big box, and as I recall it, there were 28 or 30 spaces in it, and there were 3 of each apple in it, and we always got number 1 on that. No one ever matched us, but I remember we in that what are the first apples?
Like transparent or
Yeah,
something?
Yeah, they of course didn't keep worth a hoot, and so we came up with a solution to that. We waxed them so that you couldn't eat them, but they looked good.
They look good.
Yeah, that was, I did that. Oh, I picked a lot of apples. Annie and I think we probably made our first money thinning out turnips. And I don't know what we got paid, but anyway, the turnips had been, the seeds had been planted, and then you had to go on and plant them, or thin them out. And I remember another job that I got paid for, I don't know, a cent a dozen or something like that, was gathering up potato bugs in the potatoes.
Okay.
And because I don't think they had spray, they had Parastrine or something they put, but I had a can of kerosene and just went around picking them up and throwing them in the can of kerosene. Then later on I did other chores around, and
I suppose haying was something every year.
yeah, I was a little bit involved in the haying, and I didn't start milking until I was, I don't know, I guess 15 or 14 or 15 or something like that before I milked. One of the, as a little guy, one of the things that I remember was a birthday party. And I discussed this with either Bill or Jim or both. We had a birthday party, and of course in those there was always a nickel or a dime, and then some other odds and ends in the birthday cake. But I remember that our play, now I don't know if we were cowboys and Indians or what we were, but where we played was up on the side hill over by Henry Tingley's, by the bank there, because his cows were there, and the cows would go up and down, and they had a little path. And I remember we went over there to play and running up and down here. And whoever, either Bill or Jim, remember that not only a birthday, but when they came, that's where we went to play.
Those neat cow paths on the bank, they were, yes.
You remember, of course, that the water system that we had. There was a spring down there, which was really on Henry's property, and then it came over to the brook came over to our side of the property, and then went down, and of course the water went from there to the cistern by Annie's house there, and was pumped into the house, and then it ran to the. However, I don't know who did it, but anyway, we built a little dam down below there, and that was for swimming. We could get it. I guess we maybe got it as much as a foot deep, and I remember Annie and I swimming there and eating some kind of an apple and donuts. So we were sitting in the water eating apples and donuts.
Eating Grammy's donuts.
Yeah.
Well, she made good donuts, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Her donuts were always harder than other people's. I kind of like the other bit. Now, of course, I'd like some of hers.
Right.
But that's a back recollection of there. Oh, I don't know what's else. I remember, of course, I was young enough that when it was time to the whole family to go picking greens, I was a part of the green picking. And
You used to pick greens to earn a little bit of money too.
oh yeah, later on that was my business. I did very well. I would go in the morning and on the bicycle, and I would pick 7, 8-quart baskets of greens and tie them in bags, bring them back about noon, drive up and down the road and sell them, come back and have dinner, and then from there I'd go up Tingley Road, and I found a place there for sandfire, and I'd buy get sandfire greens. I remember quite young of Mother taking us on either the 24th of May or the 3rd of June up to the Millses to go fishing. And I guess I was quite young then, but can you imagine? I mean, Mother walked from there to the Millses with us.
And the Millses lived in Memel.
In Memel.
In Memel.
Yeah.
So you walked to Memel with Grammy.
Walked to Memel, and then from there we walked up to the Red House Brook, but we didn't. And walked there. We thought that was a good place to fish. It was, but we didn't know where to fish. However, one of the things I remember was that a real thunderstorm, and we were up there. And I remember running home, trying to run home from to get back to the Mills house, and of course and Mama running along, and she wasn't really much of a runner. We got soaked to our skins, all of us, but that was nothing unusual. And so I was quite young for that.
So both families went fishing, like the cousins, everyone went fishing.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. 24th of May, you went fishing, and that continued. The first time I went up Clark to fish there, and he would come here, and he took me up the McAllister Road, and we would drive in a little bit of ways, and then we would walk and walk and walk, and then go down through the bush and through the woods and get the stream and then fish it down. Now, I don't think anyone ever caught a big trout there, but we caught dozens of little ones. And after that, when I was a teenager, I used to go by myself on the first Saturday and go and fish by myself. And today, parents wouldn't let a child do what I did, go way up there by myself. And but I would come home with 10, 11, 12 dozen little trout. And I sit down and clean them all. And we had, everyone had a real feed of trout on Sunday morning. And I remember one time I was up there and I was at a bit of a deeper spot. And I thought maybe that's where the fish were. And I leaned over too far and fell in. And right in, soaked completely. So I just took off all my clothes and hung them up and continued to fish until they dried off. But, you know, I well could have drowned there, and no one would have known the difference. They went looking for me as they went looking for Uncle, the one who wrote the letter, Uncle, who went to the States. Grandfather's brother.
Uncle Albert?
Uncle Albert.
Oh, yes.
They'd lost me, they're looking for me. Or they looked for me as they did for Uncle Albert.
I guess his kitten found him. Wasn't that how it went?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
his kitten found him. That's amazing.
Speaking of kittens, I had a very nice little kitten. I'm sure, I don't know what I called it, but it's probably Fluffy or something. But as you may know, I never had good teeth. And I had a lot of headaches, or toothaches. And my kitten used to sleep by my face when I had a toothache. And,
Right.
You know, it got run over by a car.
Uh-oh.
The story of my teeth, my God, I never had any teeth. And before I knew this doctor, my baby teeth had kind of gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had the brilliant idea that maybe if they pulled them out, maybe my next teeth would be better. And this is something I remember very vividly as a child, that either Henry Tingley or Jim West drove Mother and Dad and I up to the dentist, which was up Rat Road there.
Okay, after that,
Yeah.
okay, first
Rat
ever.
Hill.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
For dentist Murray, and Dr. Carnwith came to administer the anesthetic, and they took me upstairs and tied me down on a bed and put me to sleep and proceeded to pull my teeth, pull my baby teeth. And I think they were pulling the back teeth. But to have a place to pull the back teeth, they put something in to keep my mouth open.
Mm-hmm.
And in keeping my mouth open, they broke my lower front teeth. So, and they were the second teeth. So I never had any lower teeth. I used to be quite a show. I could stick toothpicks in them and smile at people. So and after that, I went regularly when the dentist came to Albert. Went to the dentist, and that was for, I'd either have a filling or a tooth pull.
Right.
Filling was $1, but you get it pulled for 50 cents. Many, oh, and incidentally, while he stuck a needle in to take the pain away, he didn't wait for it to react until he pulled it. The pain would go away after I was halfway home. Oh, it was terrible. It was terrible. I guess oh, I guess maybe when I was in high school before I actually went to a dentist in Moncton. But by then, everything was too late, so I got, when I went to Hudson, I know that when Elsie sent me to Winnipeg to see her family, I know they looked my teeth over very carefully, and I know that they told Elsie that they thought she could do better, which I'm sure she could have.
You told me once about the horse race at the Hopewell Hill Fair that you were in the cart with Grandpa?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There were two people that had trotters. There was Grandpa and I don't know who the other one was.
Captain Bacon, didn't you say it was Captain
Well,
Bacon?
but I think that, well, maybe he had another horse, but because Kit, my grandfather bought Kit from Captain Bacon. But anyway, there was as a part of the thing, there was a horse race, and I got to ride with my grandfather, and the race started at the by the barn below, right below the where the whorehouse was, it tore down, you know.
Okay.
There by the big tree.
Okay.
You started there and you raced down to, and you turned at Churchbrook, no, at Churchbrook and back. Yeah, I got to ride with that. Oh yeah, the fairs were quite great thing when I was young. I raised a big squash and got a prize for that big squash. It was as a result of throwing rotten squash over the bank behind the barn, and of course they would grow, and this one was very good, and I kept turning it. It was a very, very fine scarf, or squash. I also raised a very fine rooster, and there was, in addition to that fair, there was a kind of a fair for poultry, and that took place in the store right at the northeast corner of the corner there, across from
George Newcomb's.
Across from George Newcomb's, there was another store, which where many, many years ago, I think, the Wests had a store there. But that's where, and I had a big, nice rooster. I got prize for that rooster too. And I had a calf that I took to the fair and got a prize on my calf.
And you used to go down to Annie Peck's and get ice cream, did you?
Well, that was, yeah, she had ice cream when the fair was on. And that is when you could buy cigarettes, a pack of 5 for a nickel. But and her ice cream never was hard. It was soft and terrible, but it was ice cream. Yeah, the Hill Fair was quite an event. Quite an event. Took all years, and I think the name of the judge of the cattle and horses, I think his name was Pugsley. And then of course that would be on a, I think on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And then the Hall Fair, the Albert Fair, was, I guess, Thursday and Friday. I remember there were some people that came and brought their horses, or their horses and cattle to the Hill Fair, and would stay over somewhere, and because they were from up country somewhere. But the Albert Fair was also quite an affair, and much more interest there. I think I still have a bottle of the elixir that some guy, they were selling stuff for $1, I think it was. I think I still have a bottle of the, whatever it was.
It was supposed to cure everything, I suppose.
Yeah, the cure all of everything. But,
Tell us about going to Hopewell Hill Superior School, your memories of that school.
well, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more about, I'll tell you a little bit about Hopewell Hill School. A couple of things of interest. Somewhere, of course, nothing ever got thrown away around home, including an old pair of boots with the high toe, like little Abner, you know. And of course, I'd been gone barefoot all summer, and came time to go to school, and I needed boots, and so they looked around and they found these things. Of course, they were hard as a rock, and these damn big toes sticking up, and they weren't shoes; they were boots that laced up. So I guess my dad decided that'd be okay for me to wear to school, and there was no point arguing. So I put them on, started for school, and got down to the ditch and away from home, and took them off and hid them. Went to school in my bare feet, and then put them back on when I came home. Jim McGorman, we were at school, we were sliding down over the road and down to where there were some trees, and he went in and I broke a leg or something. Anyway, he ended up in the hospital. Now at this stage of the game, both Mary Keith and Ruth Keith were both teaching there at that time. And Jimmy was upstairs in bed recuperating. And Bill West and Les Mills and I, after school on Friday, went to visit him. There was a lot of snow that year, most years there were. And so we went up and were visiting with him, and he looked out the window, and the snow was practically up to the upstairs window. And the Keith sisters had also come to visit Jimmy. And I don't know what possessed us, but we decided it would be fun if we weren't there. So we opened the window and jumped out and went home. And in the meantime, that was not Jim. Jimmy was the little one.
Donnie?
Yeah. Donnie.
Don.
It was Donnie was the other older guy. Jimmy was just a little runt, and he was running up and downstairs. And so one of the trips he ran downstairs, and Mrs. McGorman said, "Well, I'm sure that the boys will be down very soon." And brave Jimmy says, "They're not up there." "Oh yes, they are. I haven't seen them indeed." "No, they're not there." "Well, where are they?" "They've gone home." "Well, how did they get out?" "They jumped out the window." So they said, "Well, why did they jump out the window?" So he had the brilliant answer for that we were afraid of Miss Keith. So Monday morning, without any inquiries of any kind, the three of us stood up in front of Mary Keith and took the strap. She didn't say a word, just called us. She knew why we were there, just called us to the front, hold out your hands. And she could deliver a pretty good strap. I also got the strap from Clyde Keith. That was coming home from there was we were rehearsing for the Christmas concert at the not at the school, but at the place that burned down.
Oh, okay, the temple? No, not the
No,
temple.
well, there was
The hall across the
there was
road?
a hall, yeah, there was a
Okay.
hall. And I don't know, they did something that annoyed me terribly anyway. And by this time, it's I guess this was earlier, it was Clyde and Mary Keith. And they both stayed at Sophie McGorman's. Sophie, yeah. Not Sophie McCallum's. And it was kind of a nice warm day. We were walking. I was walking home alone as usual, and they were ahead of me. And no, they were ahead of me. And I was alone, and I guess I was just fuming about something. Anyway, when they were a long distance away, I had picked up a nice snowball, and I leaned back and threw it. Well, of course, it was 20 feet short of hitting them, but they heard it, and they knew what it was, and they turned around, said nothing, just went home. Same thing Monday morning. I got it. They were good teachers. They were. But, I wasn't a good. I was a good student, but not from the standpoint of learning, but not from the standpoint of obeying.
What was what were your favorite subjects that you?
I was good in math. I was good in most subjects until it came to taking Latin. Latin just didn't like Latin at all. I dropped Latin in grade 9. The reason I dropped Latin, first I didn't like it, but again, back to when I was a wee little gaffer, Mama used to take me to visit the Allinghams, and she was a sister of Sophie McCallum and of Uncle Alden. And they came from Gagetown or something like that, and they raised McIntosh red apples. And I was very small in this city, but I remember that I was there and was sitting on his knee and got the standard answer, you know, what are you going to do when you grow up, little feller? And I said, well, I think I will be a doctor. So after that, for years and years and years, I received a little box of McIntosh Reds in the mail, addressed to Dr. Hubert Wright.
Oh, this is...
But by the late 30s, thought of doctors disappeared because I knew that I was coming of age for a war that was inevitable, and that if I were to pursue my thought of doctors, it would mean a terrible debt load. And I had this all figured out in my mind, and then even if I get through and I go to war and get killed, that debt load will land on top of my parents, and I can't let that happen, therefore I can't become a doctor. And so if I give up Latin, that will eliminate any thought of me ever being able to be a doctor. And so that's one of the reasons I gave up Latin, to make sure that I got the idea of being a doctor out of my mind.
Made it impossible, so you didn't.
Made it impossible.
So you didn't have to consider that option.
I didn't have to consider it anymore, no.
So after you graduated from Riverside Consolidated, what year did you graduate, and then what did you do?
Graduated in '37, and I went to business college. I went to Success Business College in Moncton. I started there the first day of November of 1937. And I remember that very, very vividly. I'll tell you that story. I told it to Jim West, and he said, "Oh my God." I had worked that summer. I had looking for, well, I don't know what I did. Yeah, I do. That was the summer that I worked at the Hopewell Hill Cemetery. There was a terrible type of grass that had been brought into that cemetery. Someone thought that this would be great stuff to have around the cemetery because it didn't grow much and it was hardy and so on. Well, it was like wire, and it was terrible stuff. And it spread the whole cemetery. And there was money in the cemetery coffer, and they decided, we are going to get rid of this. So John Russell was in charge of it, and you could just come there and get a job. And the way you got a job, it would mark out a plot for you, and it would be given to you, and that was your plot to work on. And what I had to do was dig it up, shake out the loam, take the grass, put it in wheelbarrows, take it over to the bank and throw it down the bank, and then haul good loam that they were bringing in and put it around that particular plot, square up the corners, put the lines on, square up the corners, level it off, and so on and so forth, and get it ready for seeding. And when it was ready, I'd call on the boss, John Russell, to come and seed it, and then I would rake it, and he would approve it, and put my hand in the note that I had done that, and I'd take another one. Well, I forget how much was paid for a plot, but it was if you worked hard, it was good work. And I did. I went there early in the morning, and John Russell would already be there because he got a ride to the shave mill in Alma. Someone was driving down there with a car, and he got a drive, and so he would be there in time for the shave mill to open. And I think at that time the shave mill opened at 6 o'clock. No, I say shave mill. Not shaves. They were making little barrels.
Stave?
Stave mill. And I was there shortly after that and worked until supper time, and I made good money. Working with me was Mac McGuigan one of the O'Regans, I don't know which one. And an interesting part of the story there that I remember very, very well, Mac was living back in Woodward Settlement. And I think his wife had died by then. I didn't even remember him having a wife. But he was living, God knows who, with someone back there, where there was lots of home brew being made. And he would bring a bottle of home brew once in a while. Now in the little house there was a bag full of grass seed. And so when there was time for the one that you had approved to have the grass, then Russell would come and put it down. But Mac didn't bother getting his done every time, seeded every time he'd finished. He'd build up a few. And then he'd bring a bottle of hooch and stick it down in the grass seed, and then he'd call for John Russell to come and seed the grass. Well, John would find a bottle of home brew there. So half a bottle later, they'd get around to seeding the, and the next morning when I was there nice and early, I'd find John going around fixing up the mess that Mac McGuigan hadn't bothered with. He didn't have to be too careful. He knew that with a half a bottle or a bottle of hooch that Russell would fix it. John Russell would fix it up for it. But,
Job security.
job security. Now, how did I get into that?
You were earning money to go to business college.
Go to business college. Now I'll tell you about getting to business college. This was, I wanted a little holiday, and so I wanted to go on the island with Huey. And he was huffing pretty hard at that time, and he didn't even have a motorboat. He just had a rowboat.
Mm-hmm.
So Gilly Prosser and I rowed to get to the island, rowed Huey over. And there was the son of an assistant, and I sorted out his name, Cannon. Something by the name of Cannon was the assistant, was Huey's assistant at that time. And the son was there. And so as soon as we got there, he wanted to go ashore, so he took the rowboat and rowed over to Mary's Cove and docked it there, and then he was walking to Harvey. And that was, I don't know, Sunday or Monday, and he was supposed to be back in a couple of days. And on the following Monday, I was supposed to start at business college. And it was beautiful weather, and the days passed, and he didn't show up. And I started to get nervous. So there was quite a big fishing boat that Huey, I guess, at one time had, probably with a motor in it, or maybe it was just a derelict that had been left there. And it had a mast and an oar, no rudder, and one side of it was all smashed up, and so every time the tide came in, it just sat there and filled with water. And well, by Friday I was getting desperate, so we took a mess of oil-soaked rags and so on, and we went down and we chinked up the side of the boat to the water line, only to the water line. We didn't overdo it. and waited to see what would happen when the tide came in. Well, by George, we had bailed it out and so on. By George, it floated. So Saturday morning, we decided we were going to Harvey. So we pushed the thing out from the wharf and put up the sail and pointed toward Harvey. Now, I thought that Gilly Prosser, in that his real father had been a seaman, maybe knew something about sailing. I didn't, except what I'd read in a book, something about tacking. So we set out for Harvey, which was southwest. So was the wind. And it was very nice out there, and the sail was open nicely. But after quite some time, I realized that was nice, but we weren't going anywhere. We were just holding our own. We weren't getting toward Harvey at all. And I had well, what are we going to do about this, you know? But my decision was made by a squall of wind that grabbed the mast and turned the boat over on the leaking side. And it half filled with water and then straightened up. So we bailed that out, and then I decided we were going ashore. So I turned it to the northeast, and away we went. It's first and last time I ever sailed a boat, and it's lovely sailing. My God, it's a nice feeling. And we were going lickety-split. Now, I didn't care where we were going, but we were going to land somewhere. Well, it was very fortunate. We landed very, very, very close to Tingley-Bido, except a long ways out in the mudflats from it, because the tide was going down. And I remember as we got there, we got into the rough mudflats, and it was just like on washboard, bump, 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 and then whoof, and drove the thing right into the mud banks. Well, we waited until the tide had gone out. We got out and walked home. Had dinner, got some poles, maul, some rope, went back out, drove them into the ground, tied the rope to the boat, and went back home and phoned Harvey, I know someone that Huey knew in Harvey, and told him of our dilemma. So he says, I'll take care of that, which he did. The next morning, they said, yeah, we'll get it in the morning. So I went up on the hill the next morning to see what was going on, and by this time there was a strong northwest wind blowing. So the motorboat came along with 3 people in it, came to where the boat that I had abandoned left, and they waited a while, and then pretty soon that boat floated. It was stuck in the mud, and I guess they rocked it a little bit. Then they tied the boat with the motor on it to the back of the derelict boat, and they put young Cannon in the back boat, and they got in the front and manned the sail. And I watched them. And boy, did it go from there to the island in one heck of a hurry. And of course they knew how to maneuver even with an oar. And they went along the side of the island and drove into where the wharf was and so on. And so that was my first and last sailing. But afterwards I thought, you know, there was every reason that we should have drowned there. Of course, any kind of a life bet or something, they were unknown. And that was one of the big ones, yeah. So I went to school in Moncton, visited with Mrs. Rosenau. Mrs. Rosenau was Mitten. She was the eldest of the Mitten family, of Ora Mitten and all the rest of them, and a friend of my mother's. My mother had some one or two very close friends at the Mittens, and so we stayed there. I boarded there, and I think Mother paid for my board with eggs and butter and so on. I got my money to go to business college. Mother and Mother had arranged for Ira Sterrett, R.W. Sterrett, Bob Sterrett's wife, to loan me the money to go to business college. And so it was a 10-month course, and I think I finished it. I started in November, and you could go as fast as you were able to, and I think I finished it either by the end of April or the end of May, and looked for a job, and there was no jobs to be found anywhere. I wrote out applications to every business place in Moncton. Every letter was letter perfect. If I'd made a mistake, you didn't erase it. You write new and drop them off at everyone. No takers, no takers. The only taker there was Eaton's, and I wouldn't go to work for Eaton's because at that time, Eaton's were letting out anyone who was reaching the age of 25 and so on, where they might be getting any kind of a security. Eaton's were letting them out and hiring guys like me. And I'm stubborn, I refused to go to work at Eaton's. And however, I stayed there. That was in Gunningsville, where I boarded. Walked across the bridge morning and night to on Robinson Street. Robinson Street, yeah. And someone else was boarding there. It was Mabel Woodworth? Woodworth, from Woodworth Settlement, who was a school teacher. She was teaching in Gunningsville. I think it was Mabel Woodworth. Someone, I know whoever was died quite recently that I heard that she had died. And we lived with Mrs. Rosenau, who had a son and a daughter. And the son was a rotten individual. The daughter was a nice girl. She went to business college with me at the same time. But the son Albert, he was a real rocker. He treated his mother like shit and talked to her, just foul-mouthed talked to her. Oh, I hated him. When I heard he had died, I think I had to say I was glad. He was a little runt too. I felt like killing him. But then, as a result of having borrowed money from Ira Sterrett to go to business college, Rob and Iris used to come to New Brunswick every year in their big car. I can't remember now what kind of a car, but they got a new one every year. And Dad and I came home from haying. This was in August, and there they were. So we had supper, dinner, supper. Probably it was peas, beans, and new potatoes. And or it may have been goose down grade, one or the other. And Dad and I went and did the milking. I took the milk in the house, and Rob was there talking to Dad. You see, Dad had worked in Hudson for Rob for 2 years, in 32 and 33. So I came out from the milking, and Dad came to me and said, "Would you like to go to Hudson?" The way he opened the conversation. And I said, "Why?" "Well, for a job." He said, "I'll go anywhere." So Rob Sterrett wanted a clerk who could type and take shorthand and do the bookkeeping, because in his organization he had the agency for North Star Oil, which was like an Imperial Oil agency. And there was a kind of warehouse there with tanks and so on, and there was a little office. There was a guy by the name of Cease Render who was in charge of the division. And Cease was half paid by Sterrett and half by North Star Oil. And he wanted someone who could take shorthand and type. Well, his assistant at that time was S.B. Sterrett, who could type, and I think he typed with 2 fingers, and he didn't take shorthand. And he didn't really want to do anything. I have it written in his own words that working was not one of his fortes. And so Cecil wanted someone, and so that's the way I got that job. And so as a result of borrowing money from them to go to business college and graduating and so on, I got a job in Hudson, and I left Hudson on my birthday, 29th birthday at 1938. And I've been away ever since. I've been away ever since. Does that thing run out yet? Be a good idea if it had.
Still recording.
Still recording? Well, you asked me.
Let's just stop it and I'll check how much tape is, it's a go.
Well, to talk a little bit about my father, one of the things that comes to mind, actually, I don't think I ever got a licking, strapping, from either my mother or my father. But I remember coming very, very close one time with my father. Now, I don't know what the occasion was, except, of course, I was a young bugger. And it was at the kitchen table, it was at the table, and I was sitting, I guess, beside him, and Mother was around the corner. What I said or did, I don't know. But it was a bit too much for him, and he started for me. And I knew I was for a licking. And I got up and ran. And I ran out the back, out through the, and outside, and by this time my mother was intercepting. And I didn't get the licking that I deserved. But I remember he was, and I don't know if he had something there to hit me with and didn't get a chance or not, but that's the closest I ever came to being, having corporal punishment for my mother and father. That's the closest I ever came. Things about Dad, one was he loved music. He, of course, sang in a quartet. He sang in church. Of course, he was brought up as as a Methodist, but the Baptists changed that for him, and so he sang, and he sang tenor in the Baptist church up at the left-hand side there. And I think he sang or attended every funeral that there was within anywhere within driving or anything distance. He would not miss a funeral. He was very what you call it, with the cemeteries and so on.
Conscientious?
Yeah. He several times he was very concerned that there wasn't room in the plot there for me. And of course, I remember from talking to him, he moved bodies around like other people use chess. If someone had died and been buried and now they should be someplace else, he was there to dig the body up and move it, you know, like as you may or may not know, when the first of the Stair boys that were killed, and that was in a gun accident, 2 kids, they were teenagers in Hudson. I think it was Billy. Jim and Bill remember it because we all were Boy Scouts, and we were present at the burial. Well, Bob Stair built a big stone and bought a plot, and the plot was up near the fence, which it is now belongs to Everett Newcomb. But Bob Stair had started that plot and put up the stone and so on and so forth. Well then, when, I don't know, I know I used to mow it, get paid for mowing it, but anyway, they in effect, they gave up that stone when Bud had been killed in Hudson, and took the remains of the boy back, and I don't know who else had been in there. I don't know if Spurgeon had been, I don't think Spurgeon had been buried there. I think he'd been in the other plot, which was, anyway, where'd I get on that?
How Grampy would care for cemeteries
Yeah,
and...
yeah. However, he was very thinking about cemeteries and where people should be buried and so on and so forth. Very much like Jim West is now. As I got a little older, and I guess this was after he had come back from Hudson, and I was getting big enough to be helping with the haying and so on. I'd be working at the marsh with him, and he wanted to tell me about the Wright family. I didn't. I wasn't interested in all of this story about all these old people. I didn't give a damn who they were. And now I'm trying to find out who they were. But we would be working around together, and he'd be talking away about this, whether we were ditching or what. But at that age I wasn't interested, and I think that is common to most young people. I was more interested in girls and so on and so forth. I remember that on 2 occasions when I was helping Dad, and this is to do with barns, there was barn roof that was leaking, and so it had to be patched. And I guess it was shingles, and it was wasn't raining like this, but it was very, very high, very, very high ceiling and muggy. And it wasn't, I guess it had been raining and it wasn't good for it. So that was the day to patch the roof. So the way roof got patched was Dad would go inside and poke a pike pole where the hole was, and I'd be up on top watching that and then driving in a shingle. And I remember and then up on that roof, I wasn't hanging on to anything, I was just going around. And I was fairly well up near the peak. Oh, there was a ladder that I'd gone up, but I was over from the side of the ladder. And I started to slip. And I don't know, I guess from the roof would have been, what, 12 feet, I guess, or something like that. But I'm sliding down that just like it was a water slide. And I had the presence to roll sideways. I was face down, and I rolled over on my back and then over on the other side and caught the
Eavesdrop or?
no, I caught
The ladder.
the ladder.
Oh, yes, you were rolling sideways to
Yeah.
get to the ladder.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Great thinking.
The other very frightening ladder episode, we wanted to do the same thing on the barn roof at home, on the same basis, but it was high.
That is very,
Very
high.
high.
Very high.
And so, we went up from the roadside. Now, we didn't have a ladder that was tall enough, but we had another ladder that had been made by taking a long pole and cutting it into, drilling the holes and cutting it in two. Now, it was very strong, but it was like a fishing pole. It
Yes.
was very limber.
Yes.
So, that ladder was tied to a long ladder to be able to reach the roof, the edge of the roof. Then there was a hook ladder that had to be carried up and be pushed up and tipped over to catch the roof. So Dad and I went up this first ladder together, carrying this roof. And I guess, I don't know if he was ahead or if I was ahead. But this thing is swaying back and forth, and we're carrying this heavy hook ladder up. And the spring ladder was near the top. And so as the further I got up, the more it was springing. In and out, sideways,
Yes,
and
right.
everything.
Yes.
And when we finally reached the edge of it, and then started to lift up the hook ladder, until it was far enough to tip over, and then start to push it up. Well, every time you pushed it, the one you were standing on would come out from the eaves, from the bottom. And I think I was at the top. And so every time we pushed it, that thing would come out half a foot. We continued to push until finally it was up and hooked over. And I got back down. And that's the only time I really knew what it was for my knees to knock. I was so scared. By the time I got back down, I stood there and my knees were knocking. Well, after that, I went back up and got up the hook ladder and took a rope up and threw it around the peak and tied it around me, and then I walked all around up there and it was fine. But I'm telling you, getting up there, it was bloody frightening.
Well, that's a very, very high roof.
And I worked with Dad in the woods cutting wood to both there and up at the other property up beyond Aunt Edna's, and digging potatoes and all of that. But Dad was very much like Uncle Cliff, never went to bed. He roamed around at night with the flashlight, or not with the flashlight, with the lantern. It would be dark and he'd be out wandering around out into the barn. Now this, of course, was in earlier days, but he was always walking around at night with a flashlight.
Checking things, or?
Oh, doing something it hadn't gotten finished the previous day, during the day. But yeah, he took the lantern and away he went. He'd be in the, doing anything. I used to, another thing that we had a chance to not talk about, but when we should have been talking, was me turning the grindstone while he sharpened all of the knives and axes and the whole works, and the cutters for the cutting hay and so on. I remember then there was another thing that took place there that I remember, and that was cutting the horns off cattle. That was a procedure, and I was present for that. I remember one time there was one that just wouldn't stop bleeding, and of course there were lots of cobwebs in the barn, so I went around all the spots gathering up hands full of cobwebs, and we used the cobweb and placed it over the horn, where the horn was cut off. It stopped the bleeding. I only remember Dad ever killing one steer in the yard there. I remember that usually, I don't know where they went to be killed, but the cattle we had were usually sent away someplace, and he usually sold. But I remember he slaughtered one there one time, and we had more beef then than we'd ever had instead of the pork. And Mother didn't fry liver, and so the liver was hung, and it was late fall. The liver was hung on the side of the barn at the back, up quite high, and you'd go there and slice a piece off and throw it to the cats.
Oh, okay.
You know, but it was too high for the cats to get at, but you take the knife and cut a piece off. But twice a year, we killed 2 pigs, raised 2 pigs and killed 2 pigs, and that was quite a process. But they were done at home and cut up at home. Dad took care of that. Dad also took care of the chickens, Mother's chickens that had been raised to sell as poultry, and I was there and witness and part of that of cutting the heads off and chopping, holding them by the block and cutting off the heads and then cleaning them out. As opposed to the way chickens are done today, that they're sent to market with the innards still in, everything there had to be cleaned out. And if it was fall and Huey was home, that is the only time we had liver. Huey got all the chicken livers and fried them. He liked the chicken livers. I'll tell you about Uncle Silas. He came home quite frequently, and something I phoned Jim West and had him check this up not long ago. I guess I was talking to him, and I said, "Is the biffy behind the barn still there?" And I told him if it was, I wanted the door. And he went, and it's not. Carl had bulldozed it down much earlier than that. But the reason I wanted the door off the biffy was that when Uncle Silas came home, it was a nice smooth door on the inside. And that's the one where it didn't say toilet. Remember, it said "to let" as if it was for sale.
Oh, okay.
That is what was written in big letters on the front, "to let." And Silas would write all about his trip home on the inside of that door. And so, if it could have been found, there was the history of all of his trips home.
I remember initials being carved in it.
Yeah.
A lot of initials.
Yeah, I'm sure my initials are there too, yeah. But it disappeared. It disappeared. We had good setup there on Beffy's. There was 2 behind the barn and 3 by the house. 2 big ones and a little one. So 3 people could sit at one time. It was very, very much like they say that things are in Europe, you know. You just gather together and do what you have to do. But Dad well, of course, he later, he had a lot of years when he wasn't feeling too well. But I believe he used to have a terribly sore neck, and I believe that I'm correct, that came as a result of he and probably Mother driving a horse and sleigh, probably racing or something in any way, rolling it over, and I think he probably broke his neck, but it was never put. So he always had his head cocked a little bit, and that is what it was from. But then it would have some very serious, it would come and go, and sometimes he'd be right over. Then the poor beggar had the psoriasis with it, and then his feet gave out on him. God, his toes were curled right around,
And arthritis.
and it had his arthritis and so on. It was kind of, but you know, he was, in spite of all the other things, he was very sentimental. Mother never cried when I left home, when we would come and visit. Mother would, I think, have a tear in her eye, but she would say goodbye and then just turn and walk away. Whereas Dad used to cry bitterly.
Yeah.
Yeah. He he hoped that he was still there when we came back and so on. However, I guess there's probably other things regarding him, but I'll swing to something else. I don't know what I'm going to swing to.
Swing to Granny.
Well, boy, did she have a tough life. She had a tough life. I think Bessie was 3 when grandmother died. My grandfather had, as I hear it from more from Clark than from anyone else, that grandfather had housekeepers and housekeepers taking care of the kids. And I believe at that time that Aunt Berta Sterritt, who married Spurgeon, I believe I'm correct that they lived in the big 3-story house that burned down near the older Newcomb house. Do you remember the big 3-story house there?
Yeah.
I think the last people that I knew that lived there were Robinsons, who had been in Hudson and came back. And I think that is where Sterritt lived, and I know that Aunt Berta did a great deal trying to help Grandpa, and I think later on vice versa, as we read in the letter what
In Albert's letter.
what Albert thought
Of Spurgeon.
of Spurgeon. As I read through things, think through things, I think maybe he was right. I think he knew what he was talking about. But I know that Aunt Berta helped out, and I have, and the Sterritts and the Wrights used to be together for haying and so on and so forth. In fact, I have a picture of the whole bunch of them out haying.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, Mother, I have her diaries and her sorrow of losing her papa. The sorrow that she was never able to skate. Her legs wouldn't hold up, and she couldn't go skating with everyone else. And then Uncle Henry moving away, and other things around home. But then she got married, and a certain amount in reading. I have a copy of grandmother's diary, Grandmother West's diary, from the start of it in January of 1910 until she died around June, I think. And Mother had finished teaching. She was getting married, and she didn't teach that year, and so she were home. And this is in Grandmother's diary, the preparation for her wedding and so on and so forth. And I think Grandmother died before she got married, didn't she?
She died in 1901.
No, that's Grandfather.
Okay.
Grandmother died in 19... no, the grandmother I'm talking about, I'm now on the other side.
You're on the
now
west
on
side.
the west side.
Right.
And I think that's 1910, and that's the year that Mother and Dad were married.
Married, okay.
But speaking of, and
Yes, because she taught at Riverside in 1909.
yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Aunt Edna was sewing for her and so on and so forth. However, they got married, promptly Mother took over. And so she had my grandfather, my fraternal, my grandfather on the right side. Now by then, he'd already had his accident at the mill, and by then, Harvey, of course, was working on taking care of the farm, but I think the rest of the family were still all around there. I think that Clark was probably working in the bank. I don't know what Arthur was doing, and Huey was still young, and Annie was, and Bessie was little. And so she never had, as she wrote to Elsie, I hope you have fun playing I don't know, playing at being married or something. She never had that opportunity, and she didn't. She immediately took over a full family. And then, a year or so after that, they had Helen and so on. Never did she complain. The only time I ever heard her complain was one time she had been up in the garden and had planted a bunch of seeds. And my grandfather, not knowing they had been planted, went to hoe the garden to plant the seeds. And I was quite young at this time. I remember that when Mother saw what my grandfather had done, she broke into tears. And I knew that I didn't know what he had done, but my grandfather had done something to my mother. And I think I went and hammered at him and beat him. I was so mad at him. But that's the only time I ever really saw her complain about anything. She worked so hard. She ran such a household well, cooked, beautiful cook.
Made her butter, the best butter,
Best butter there was, yeah.
and her flowers.
And had her flowers, yeah. No, she was quite a lady.
Well respected in the church, you know, and
Yeah,
Sunday school teacher.
took us to church. Uncle Alden used to drive us, would give us a drive to church and back, which was very nice. And, I don't know, after I had left home and grown up and so on, and thought I was doing well, I even talked to them about moving to Toronto. Of course, it's just like trying to move an oak tree. I even had considerations and talked about buying Sophie McCallum's place while she was still there, so there'd be a place for my mother and dad, because I knew that house was going to pot, but nothing would change then. Nothing would change then. She was a good mother. Elsie loved her. Elsie loved her dearly. So did Bessie. Of course, Bessie had brought her up as a little girl. I'm glad really, I guess, that Mother went before Bessie did. It would have killed Bessie anyway.
Mm.
Yeah. But, oh, that's, God, after Clark was working in St. John and before he married, he would quite often come home on the weekend and he'd bring a great big bunch of bananas and oranges and maybe sometime grapefruit, but a great mess of bananas. So we'd have bananas for fun.
She must have loved to have people around the house come to visit, because I hear a lot of people talking about her having these chicken dinners, they would say, at Bertha Wright's house.
Well, those were
Church suppers?
there were church suppers. Oh yeah. I remember them. No, the church suppers were held in various places, but our place was one of them. I remember that very, very well. Yes. I don't know. That's where I remember Mrs. I forget who it was. Huey used to joke about how thin a pie she could slice, because when you went to a supper like that, you had two kinds of pie, and I don't know. I think she managed to cut them in 16 pieces instead of 12. Huey used to joke about it. Oh yes, I remember that. I remember having dinner, being at a dinner there. There was also church suppers that were held at where they had the funeral service, where Dad was laid out when he died. At
Mrs. Bishop's.
At Bishop's, but that was at the house.
Yes.
That was at the house, yeah.
Grammy's vanilla wafers, her strawberry sponge.
There was also a church supper that was held at John Tingley's, and that was oyster stew. Just oyster stew and those little oysters. And of course there was gallons of it. And I was part of that too. I remember the oyster stew with her.
You were going to talk a little bit about your brother Hillman,
Oh yes.
special brother.
Well, you see, as a little guy, I had no one to play with. Bill and Jim were too far away. The Millses were still further. Hillman was at school, so it was just Annie and I. And I guess that we did play a certain amount of things, but not as much as if it had been a boy. God, I remember she used to try to fix her hair, and you used to be able to put something in that you would set your hair and let it dry, and then when after it dry, you'd comb it out and it would fall away and you'd have curls. She used to convince me to sit down and let her wash and set my hair, and I'd have curly hair. However, in connection with Hillman, yes, this is I'm glad you brought that up, because Cecilia had tried to write Hillman's story, but Cecilia, of course, couldn't know Hillman's story as I did, because by the time Hillman had finished his schooling, which I believe was around 1933, the same time as Annie had finished her high school. By then I was grown up. I was to the age of knowing something and reason. And Hillman was at home from then with no work anywhere until 1940. And in 1940, the CNIB had an opening or something for him as a piano tuner in St. John. And I'll come back to the story at home, but I had gotten a raise and asked for a holiday from Hudson and had come home for a holiday by bus. And I took Hillman back to St. John for his job. And there was a place where you could stay at the CNIB. And I arrived there with Hillman, and I think I stayed overnight with him the first night. And then I left him and I headed home. Now, he was still at that place in 1943 when I first brought Elsie to Toronto, to Moncton, to Albert County. He was still living there because I remember going there with Elsie, like Clark had met us. We came by train and we came to St. John, and Clark had met us and took us there. But I remember that we were downstairs when they called up to Hillman that I was there. And he came down, and there was a railing down the stairs, and God, he came down there, ooh, lickety-split. So that's why I know he was still there. Anyway, he was there from 1933 until 1940. And he caned chairs. And it was a terrible trial to them because he would bring them up tight and they'd keep breaking, you know. But he caned chairs for everybody, and I don't know, he got 50 cents or $1 or something a chair for doing it. Not anything like what you get now for caning a chair. He tuned pianos, if there was any piano to be tuned. He played the piano at that time. He would go and play at the piano quite a bit, and also he'd play at the organ. He kind of gave up his own music, but he was actually an accomplished pianist. But he worked around home. Now, not in any particular sequence, but he, over a period of time, these are not necessarily in sequence, but so one we had an ice box, big old ice box. And the ice was at the barn below the road. Now that is the barn. That was Alden Peck's property, but we had the barn in there, and that is where they cut and put the ice in, of course, under sawdust. And one of the things that Hillman did religiously was take the wheelbarrow and go down and into the barn and fish out a cube or two of ice, and put it on the wheelbarrow, bring it up, take it by the pump at the outside at the front, wash all the sawdust off of it, and then bring it and put it in the house. He also would empty the water, but that was one of his jobs, one of his many jobs. In addition to that, he, and I don't know just when this started, but he made the beds. He filled the copper boiler on Sunday nights on the stove to heat up the water for washing. And this was before there was a hot water tank at the back. Eventually there was a hot water tank, I think, at the, was there not a hot water tank at the back? Well, initially there was no hot water tank. You had a copper boiler, and then you had the little hot water tank at the side, there where everyone sat. And but the copper tank would be filled up from rainwater and put in, so it'd be there to heat in the morning. And he worked the washing machine, which was the hand washer that you rocked back and forth, and then wrung out and rinsed out and wrung out. He rinsed them out and wrung out. Now, eventually, and I guess quite some time in the early stages, he not only washed them, but then they went in a tub to be rinsed, and then to be wrung out in the hand wringer, and then taken out and put on the clothesline. Well, he did that from the front end of it to the end. His mother sorted them out, and he did it, and he hung them out. And then he would go and bring them in. He'd go around out in the backyard there, and he'd sort these out. They'd all be sorted out properly, and of course you hung stuff out there and you didn't know when it was going to be dried. It might be 2 or 3 days, but of course there wasn't any soot or anything. You could just leave them until they finally got dry. In connection with that, as a little bit of a digression, I remember that there was a clothesline at the front of the house that ran over to the post near where the cross from going to the barn. There was one from the house to there that I think Huey had put up, and it was copper. Now, it was a copper wire, and I don't know where they got it, but instead of the usual stuff, it was copper, and it had been stripped off and cleaned off. And it was very fine, except that it, of course, attracted the cold. But that is where Carl's diapers were hung when they were washed, and other clothes in the wintertime. And of course, you'd put the stuff up, and it was promptly frozen stiff. But you leave it, and eventually it would come out. But I was. This would have been before Hillman was there, but I remember that I don't think I had the job of putting them up for Mother, but I had the job of taking them down. And I remember prying them loose from this copper wire and bringing them into the house, and then of course they be put up over the stove in the backyard. But back to Hillman, in addition to that, my grandfather died, I think, in 1937. I think he died, when I was in business college. As did Turney McGorman died when I was at business college. And so That's 37 or 38. Now my grandfather was in bed for, I would say, 2 to 3 years before he died, bedridden.
So
Talk about-
Granny was looking after him.
Hellman was
Hellman.
looking after him. Hellman took his meals to him. Hellman bathed him, took care of his toilet. I don't know, but Hellman may even have shaved him, I don't know. But Hellman was his nurse. Now, of course, Mother was present and I guess supervised if necessary. But Hellman was my grandfather's nurse for at least 2 years before he died. I don't know how, I know exactly how long, doesn't make any difference. That was, now, so in addition to making the beds and washing the clothes, Hellman was taking care of grandfather. And he did take care of him. My grandfather never drank. However, he liked a little brandy for medicinal purposes, and someone brought him brandy and would, and I think he maybe got pretty well lit sometimes before he went to bed. My grandfather admitted to drinking, and Bill West used to bring a crock and put it in the barn. And I think that my father, I think, did his drinking in the barn, but grandfather, it was medicinal, so was able to drink in his room. However, back to Hellman, that was some of what Hellman did. Hellman, from an early age of the 30s there, after he was home, he sawed the wood. I guess likely he split it too. May have got some help with the big ones, but with the small ones he split them. Maybe not by himself, but he certainly contributed to bringing the split wood into the house, both in the behind the woodshed behind the house, and then in the big woodshed or the little woodshed out of the back. And by then, Hellman was bringing the wood in to put in the, and I'm sure he started the fires too, I don't know. But then it progressed from that. He milked. He cleaned the stable, let the cattle out, saw that the gates were closed, and let the cattle out to water while he cleaned the stable. Let the cattle back in, and he knew from touching their heads whichever one was that it was in the right place, and of course knew every one of them by hand. He cleaned the horse barn. He bushed the horses. He put the harness on the horses if they were going out. He went up in the mow and let the hay down. And of course, there was a chute that went down to the horse barn. And there were 3 places where the hay could be coming from. There were 3 mouths, and but the one for the horses went down the chute and went right down to the horse barn. The others went on to the ground, the barn floor. And of course, he could feed the horses and the cattle.
Such a smart person he was, you know, to be able to do all these things despite his blindness.
But the piece de resistance, when we hayed, there was a pitchfork arrangement for putting the hay up in the mow. Theirs was a single pitchfork. It's called pitchfork.
Mm-hmm.
And by some ingenious way, you could move the ropes around, that you could put the hay up over where the cattle were, or on the other side of the barn floor, where the horse hay was and where the rest of the cattle hay was. And so those pitchforks could be, by changing the ropes around, and then to put it in, you came with a load of hay, you came up and twisted around and hoped you didn't tip over, and then you drove into the barn floor, unhooked the horses, and then backed one out and the other one led out. And then to put use the hay fork, the hay fork to put them, you hook the horses up to a rope and hooked in the hay put the hay fork in the hay over the hay rack that they were in, and then drove the horses up the hill and raised and then got it up there and dropped it and went down and spread it around. Quite an ingenious system. One day, one of the ropes broke. So Dad took that particular rope off, it was quite a long rope, curled it up. And it was left for Hillman to carry the rope and me to go with him up to Uncle Alden's for the rope to be spliced. So that was fine. So we went up, and of course we had lunch there, and Uncle Alden, the seaman, fixed the rope and coiled it up. And we came back home. So then Hillman says, well, come now and we will put the rope up. Now that rope had to go up, way up over where the cattle were. It was in the end, it was near the house. And you got to it, there were planks going from like at the barn floor, up the barn floor there were 2 big beams. And then there was a good sized deal that went from across there over to the end of the barn. And that is where the rope had to go. And then it had to go from there to a rope right near the top, at the front door, at the front of and then hooked down. So Helen knew where it had to go. So away we went. So up he went, the ladder to the first landing over the barn floor. And then there was another ladder up to the next one. And away he went with the rope. And then with the rope across this plank. And his helper is standing and directing where he is and where the things are. So he got over the plank. Yes, okay, now the pulley is right over your head. So he stands up, holding the rope, puts it through the pulley, and brings it back down. Then comes back down to the big beam that is above the, still, I would say, close to 15 feet above the barn floor. Shimmies along on his backside, sliding along with that, carrying the rope, and pushing it down through the pulley there, and then back and down, and hooks it up to the pulley at the bottom. So there's these two ropes, one holding the fork, and the other one to hook onto.
So you as his helper, and Hillman, you got the rope back
So
up.
Dad came home from the marsh with a load of hay, drove the horses in, got them back out, and he was all set to get the rope up before dinner. And he took a look, the rope was up. I don't know if Hellman was even there. He said, "Who put that rope up?" I said, "Hellman."
Just one of the amazing things that he could do.
I remember seeing Dad turn white as a sheet. But Hellman put the rope up. So there was damn little that he couldn't do.
That's right.
And you see, having grown up that way, I never even thought of him as being blind. He didn't carry a cane around home. When he was milking, there was the bar across between the barn and the house, that when you brought the cattle in from up on top of the hill, they couldn't wander over to the house, so there was a bar there. A round bar, not flat that you could hear something from, hear a sound from. A round bar, pole. And there was one or two that slid across from in where the hen pen was. Hellman would come from the barn with a pail of milk in each hand. And he would come to near where the bar was, and he would hesitate. If the bar was down, he would walk through. If the bar was up, he would put it down and move it. But he never did walk into that bar to know that it was there. He was quite miraculous. And of course, he lived the same after he went to St. John and after he married Alice May. Alice May was was not a housekeeper. She was not a cook. She was a musician. Hillman, oh, I'm sure that Alice May did some things around the house. But Hillman, when they got Cecilia, it was Hillman who bathed her. It was Hillman who did everything with Alice May, or with Cecilia. I realized all this more when I went there in 1937 or 1985 to help Hillman clean the house out when it had been sold. Boy, the disaster was very comparable to what there is near here. But Hillman did vacuum, though. I remember we went to see him one time, and he was down on his hands and knees vacuuming because we were coming. But the same as around home, he knew where everything was there. He knew where everything was around here, everything. The only thing that you could do wrong was to leave something out of a place that he might bump into. Aside from that, he knew where everything was and could find everything and put everything away and so on. They were in, you've been in the home, have you? Yeah, well, I was never in the basement, but he had space in the basement, and he had wood in the basement, and he had tools in the basement, and he did carpentry. He did carpentry there in the basement. He had saws, and some of them, by God, were power saws.